Japanese homes are built to not last. Yeah, that's right. Unlike most of the rest of the world, in Japan, homes like this one are demolished and replaced only after 30 years. And by then, they have almost no resale value to speak of, which is why I could go to Japan and buy a house right now for about $10,000. How is that even possible? Now, what does it mean for the people who live there? Well, that's what we're gonna figure out today. I'm Ricky, and this is 2-Bit Da Vinci. This video is brought to you by Delete Me. Japan is one of the most densely populated developed countries on Earth. Almost 125 million people live there, with 857 people per square mile. That's almost 10 times higher than here in the US. Being one of the most technologically advanced countries, you'd expect that they'd make houses that last for decades, centuries even. You'd also expect homes in Japan to be really expensive. However, while that's true in some parts of Tokyo and other major urban hubs, it's not as widespread as you might think. So that means that you and I could go to Japan right now, buy a fixer-upper for about 10 grand, put another 20,000 or so to get it up to spec, and have a house in Japan for less than $30,000. So I immediately set out to figure out why. Why is the Japanese real estate market so odd? Unlike the rest of the world where homes are considered assets that go up in price, it's quite the opposite in Japan. The first thing that popped up in my research was something called the 30-year rule. The 30-year rule for Japanese real estate is the idea that most houses in Japan are built to be demolished after about 30 years of use, and that's why they lose their value so quickly. This is totally unintuitive for most foreigners. For example, here in the US, we're used to seeing really old houses. In fact, a lot of them are worth a lot of money. It's why many people here invest in real estate. I'll get back to that in a minute because it's really important to the story. But first, as an engineer, I wanted to see what facts and figures support this claim. So the first question has to be, how common is the 30-year rule? One way to measure how often houses are replaced is to look at the building replacement rate, which is the ratio of new buildings constructed to existing buildings demolished in a given year. I found that the replacement rate for residential buildings in Japan is really high. Take a look at this. This table shows the rate at which houses are rebuilt in Japan's different prefectures in 2022. According to the data, the median building replacement rate in Japan is 4.4%, which means that for every 100 buildings in the country, between 4 and 5 are demolished and replaced every year. Now, this is much higher than the rates in the US and Europe, where it's around 1% or less. In some Swiss cities, for example, it's only 0.31% of buildings that are replaced between 2016 and 2019. The other more obvious metric is the average building age. The notion behind the 30-year rule comes from a report by the Japanese Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism, which states that the average lifespan of a wooden house in Japan is around 27 to 30 years. And for reinforced concrete apartment buildings, it's around 37. I found one research paper that supports this idea, and it could shed light on where Japanese governments came up with this rule. According to the report, wooden houses in Japan after World War II until 1964 lasted on average 22 years. After that, the average increased to 33 years between 1965 and 1990. So the 30-year rule apparently seems to check out at least to some degree. So then look at this. This is a chart of the median age of homes in the US since the 2000s. It has increased steadily over the past several decades, and today it stands around 41 years. In the case of commercial buildings, they lasted around 53 years before being demolished. But according to MIT, newly built homes have a life expectancy between 50 and 63 years. So yeah, 30 years is kind of on the short side. So then the next question has to be, what is it about Japan where these buildings aren't lasting as long? And as always, the reason wasn't simple. I came across a complex combination of history, culture, geography, and economics. The root cause dates all the way back to World War II. As you probably know, Japan suffered massive destruction during World War II. We actually made a video about why Hiroshima is not a nuclear wasteland. We'll put a link down below. Security and safety have to matter. Have you ever tried Googling yourself? I have, and it's seriously shocking, and why I signed up for our sponsor this week, Delete Me. It's crazy to me that collecting people's personal information and selling it online is a legit business, but here we are. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Just look at this. 53 data brokers had my data, and my info was reviewed over 7,000 listings. And it's not just a one-time thing. They stay vigilant and keep an eye on your data and remove it quarter after quarter as needed. You can even make custom removal requests. I've been a member now for about a year, and I just got my 4th quarterly report. And it's not just about you. How about family members? For me, I worry about my mom and dad, and Delete Me makes it easy to protect your entire family. You know, hackers are using AI to imitate people's likeness and copy their voice to trick loved ones into sending them money or private info, and guess where they get all those relationships and info from? It's why it's so important. Have you ever heard the expression, if something is free, you're the product being sold? Well, take back your privacy online. Get that extra peace of mind of having experts on your side and save 20% on all plans with Delete Me and discount code Ricky. Huge thanks to Delete Me and you for supporting the show. But anyways, after the war, Japan faced severe housing shortages and had to rebuild quickly and cheaply. This led to a boom of prefabricated, low-quality houses which were not meant to last very long. Then there's the issue of Japan being an island located on the Ring of Fire. Japan is prone to frequent natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, and volcanic eruptions, which damage and destroy many buildings every single year. Therefore, it makes sense to build houses that are easy to replace and repair rather than investing in more durable and expensive structures. And that really starts to give us a picture of why homes in Japan lose value over time. Here's a graph showing the average home selling price in the US over the last 60 years. Don't have to be an economist to tell that there's a clear trend for home prices going up, even if there are some crashes and dips along the way. But in Japan, things look different. After the 90s, home values in Japan started going down and almost leveled off in the 2010s, showing only weak signs of recovery from there. So what exactly happened here in 1990 to cause things to come crashing down? Well, it was what economists call Japan's 1990s credit crunch. The Bank of Japan tightened its monetary policy by raising interest rates, trying to curb a recent inflation bubble in the late 1980s. This made it harder for the Japanese to get loans to buy houses. The lower demand made prices drop, and it was pretty bad. If a Japanese person bought a house in the 1990s for, say, the equivalent of $100,000, that house would have been worth just a little over $53,000 in 2010. That house in the US would have appreciated by 83% and now would be worth $183,000 in 2010 and around $368,000 by 2022, which gets into a whole different problem, which is a topic for another video. So it's pretty easy to see why the Japanese simply didn't see their homes as investments. But other key parts of the equation is the Japanese culture. This isn't a video about how different Eastern and Western cultures are, so I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole. But after meeting many Japanese people and reading a lot about their culture, I came across the Japanese principle of wabi-sabi. This is a philosophy that embraces imperfection, impermanence, and simplicity. So Japanese aren't naturally prone to make an effort to perpetuate a culturally insignificant house, especially if it won't even translate to a higher resale value. This doesn't apply to heritage sites, of course, just newer buildings. As a consequence, when most Japanese inherit a home from their parents or relatives, it's common for them to tear it down and build a new one instead of renovating it. We generally tend to be more attached to the memories of the houses we grew up in. But the Japanese tend to see houses as functional and disposable objects rather than artistic or sentimental ones. Therefore, they often prefer to live in newer and modern homes. Finally, there's the issue of construction codes. Japan is frequently hit by major earthquakes, so construction codes in Japan change more frequently than any other country. Building standards are constantly updated and revised to incorporate the latest knowledge and technology for earthquake-resistant design and construction. For example, after the 1978 Miyagi earthquake, the Building Standard Act was amended in 1981 to introduce the Shin-Taijin, or New Earthquake-Resistant Building Standard. This was updated again in the year 2000. And you're not mandated to upgrade your property in Japan to fit new standards. That is, unless you want to renovate your home. So, suppose I'm in Japan and I inherited a rundown 25-year-old house. If I wanted to renovate it and make improvements to it, I would need to upgrade the structure for the new construction standards, making it really expensive. Therefore, most people just prefer to build a new house. There are other factors that come into play as well, like Japan's population collapse and its aging population. But I think you get the point. The Japanese demolish more homes than pretty much anyone else in the world. But one thing I personally love about Japan and the Japanese is how they turn everything into an art form, even demolition. When you build a house to withstand the test of time, you design and build it with durability in mind, not thinking about what comes next. But since the Japanese take down and rebuild houses so often, they actually design and build them with demolition in mind. This is particularly impressive when you see the types of joints they make when they build wooden houses. Japanese joinery is unlike any other I've ever seen. With these joints, they can build an entire multi-city house without using a single nail or a drop of glue. This is a 95-year-old wooden Japanese home being torn down. Even though everything is so old, just by removing a couple of pressure pins, everything can be taken apart. We could do an entire episode about Japanese joinery. It is truly world class. These are absolute craftsmen. But in my head, I was thinking, sure, that works on wooden houses. There's no real equivalent in the world of steel and reinforced concrete, right? It would all just be dynamite and wrecking balls for that. But it turns out I was wrong. Have you heard of silent deconstruction? It's basically disassembling a building or building it in reverse instead of demolishing it. In Japan, they've mastered silent construction of high-rise buildings in one of two ways. In the first approach, you start at the top where building components such as the steel columns, beams, and flooring are disassembled in a closed space while the ceiling is held up with jacks. Every time the two highest floors are dismantled, the jacks are lowered, letting down both the roof and scaffolding, and the building becomes 2 floors lower. This is Tokyo's famous shrinking building, the Grand Prince Hotel Akazuka. The second approach is the opposite. You start at the bottom and dismantle the bottom floor as the entire building is held up with jacks. Then you cut the support columns and lower the whole entire building by a couple of feet. Japan mastered the art of making short-lived buildings that can withstand some of the worst natural disasters. They did it by designing buildings that were easy to dismantle, but that didn't make them any less resistant. But times change, and so did Japanese buildings. Today, buildings aren't the cheap, rushed, prefabricated homes of the 1940s. And in a country that is legendary for its earthquake-resistant building code, you'd imagine that they're pretty strong, right? So why do even modern buildings only last 30 years? And the answer is, they don't. Remember how I said a minute ago that the 30-year rule worked pretty well until 1990? That's because it doesn't hold true anymore. This news article from the Japanese Times sums it up pretty well. The notion that Japanese houses self-destruct after 3 decades is a function of the government's plan to keep the economy humming with a constant need for residential construction, since it was the land ministry that concocted the 30-year limit. So what is the actual lifespan of these homes in Japan? Well, a little digging. Turns out, closer to 63 years for wooden buildings and 52 years for non-wooded buildings. Much more in line with the rest of the world. When I first saw this article, instantly triggered as weird because the Japanese are legendary for being such good builders and high-level craftsmen. But yes, culturally, unlike the weekends to Home Depot to renovate your guest bathroom, in Japan, things are a little bit different. And if you thought that was interesting, you gotta check out this video next.